Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Welcome. I'm Kira Epstein, the co-director of the new school. Today we are so honored to welcome Zen Master Norma Wong to the new school with host Serena Bien. Thank you both for being with us today, and thanks to all of you for joining us live for this conversation. We will introduce our special guest in a minute here, but I want to welcome back our host, Serena Bien. We're so fortunate that Serena is enthusiastic about working with us to put together these beautiful conversations, which are a testament to the soulful way that she moves through the world. A few words about the new school for those of you who don't know us. The new school at Commonweal is a learning community of dialogue and conversation. We explore how to build more resilience and better stewardship for body, soul, community, and the earth. We produce our conversations and we make them available for thousands of listeners. We are on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We've been doing this since 2007, and we have more than 400 podcasts that you can listen to as you like. Here's my plea to please like and subscribe to our media feeds so that you'll be notified when the recordings post. Ken Adams is behind the scenes. He's making all this run smoothly, and he produces our podcast for us. So thank you, Ken. So Serena Bien and Norma Wong and all of you with us, welcome to the new school at Commonweal.
Thank you so much, Kira and Ken. And it's so good to see you, Norma, and to be with all those gathered today virtually. My name is Serena Bien, and I am calling to you today from the unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands, also known as San Francisco, based in California. And today outside is a drizzly, rainy, dreary, but cozy day. And I am here with lit candles and in warm tea. And yeah, just in such a spirit of welcome and joy to be with you, Norma, and to be with those gathered. And a welcome to those listening to this recording in any form. I am a second generation member of the Chinese diaspora, inhabiting a 28-year-old's body, and consider myself a student of intergenerational world building. And one lens that I bring into this conversation today is the belief that standing in what you refer to, Norma, as the time place of collapse, I believe that in order to sustain our lives committed to justice and spiritual calling, that young people and all those orienting towards the spirit of learning and being in the work need not only to be proximate with, but also in mutual evolution with our elders who carry essential lineage and wisdom tradition. And one way one might refer to this is as intergenerational accompaniment. And the last couple months, I've just been so moved by the ways that this is already taking place from councils of civil rights movement elders in dialogue and accompaniment with 21st century young organizers or Indigenous elders engaged in cultural and lineage transmission work with the next generation, or intergenerational communities of intention experimenting with place-based nonviolent activism and community building. There are so many forms and forums where these communities of spirit are working together to build into liberated zones. And I so see, Norma, your work with the collective acceleration community as one of those places of accompaniment. And so today, as we stand in this time place of collapse with rising global temperatures, rising fascism, continued war and conflict, I hope that today's conversation can carry this impulse to be a multi-generational site of remembrance and dialogue and dreaming into new worlds, guided by you, our dear elder, Roshi Norma Wong, exploring these questions. So Before I take a moment to share your bio, I just wanted to welcome you to the new school here at Commonweal and bring your voice in with the question of how are you today in this moment, Norma?
Well, Serena, as I mentioned before, apparently I'm purple, which is a thing that happens if you have a purple background and you're on Zoom and, your lighting is a little muted. I live in a valley. I live in Kalihi Valley on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. And I live in a place where I am very fortunate that what I call this place is what this place has always been called by the people who have always lived here. And so I do not have to make a reference to the people who are long gone. The people who are here remain here, even if our agency may be different, if the flags that fly may be different, if those kinds of things may have shifted over time. This place that I live, Kalihi Mauka, which means Kalihi that is close to the mountains. Kalihi Mauka on Oahu, right? Oahu, the island of Oahu in Hawaii. All those names are the names of the native peoples. So, but apparently, how I am today is I am purple.
I'm purple too. So in that we share. Well, Norma, if you don't mind me just taking a couple minutes to share with our listeners today just a bit more about the true breadth and depth of some of your life experiences, and of course we'll share more about that. But Norma, you are, as you just mentioned, a native Hawaiian and Hakka Chinese lifelong resident of Hawaii, and you are an abbot of Anko Inn, an independent branch of Dai Honzon Chosenji, which serves practice communities in Hawaii, the US, and Toronto. You are an 86th generation Zen master, having trained at Chosenji for over 40 years. And in your earlier life, you were active in electoral politics for over 30 years, serving as a Hawaii state legislature on the policy and strategy team for Governor John Waihee. You've led teams to negotiate agreements on the munitions cleanup of Kaho'olawe Island, ceded land revenue for Native Hawaiians, and the return of lands and settlement of land issues for Hawaiian homelands. In recent years, Norma, you have been called back into service to facilitate and I love how this is phrased, to facilitate breaking the impasse and transforming policy and governance on issues of seeming contradiction in the conflict between Native culture science and Western discovery science, posing as a dispute over the construction of a telescope on Mauna Kea. You were also a team member there, narrating and facilitating a path forward through mutual stewardship. You are currently an advisor to the Speaker of the Hawaii House of Representatives, Scott Saiki, serving in policy development and facilitation roles on issues such as the protection of the aquifer from fuel contamination at Red Hill and the long-term response to the Lahaina wildfires. Norma, you have spent many years in the applied space, the direct application of Indigenous and Zen ways, values and practices to living and transformational change that are so critical to our times. And you also helped to steward the collective acceleration community of practice. And most recently, on November 5th, 2024, you released your book, When No Thing Works, a Zen and Indigenous Perspective on Resilience, Shared Purpose, and Leadership in the time place of collapse. And personally, I have been so gifted to participate in the collective acceleration learning community as of about a year ago, when my dear friends Pui Ling Liu and Omar Brownson invited me in. And it's just been such a gift to study and explore the Tao Te Ching as well as the art of war with you. So, Norma, you have such a way of seeing so clearly into the nature of our times. And so in today's conversation, I hope that we can explore some of the lenses that inform your work, to talk about the power and possibilities of intergenerational accompaniment in this moment, to hear stories and themes from your book, and finally, to invite in those who are joined live today to ask questions and be in dialogue with you as a learning community today. So without further ado, Norma, my first thing I'd just love to talk with you about is just the long line of teachers who have invited you into training through the oral tradition, through apprenticeship. In your book, you describe this training as it is a sphere of teaching influence to be within reach, within the distance of hearing and following and feeling. Moreover, we believe depth requires the rigor of face-to-face engagement and the activation of all of our senses. And I'd love just to hear from you about this form of oral training and apprenticeship from which you were brought through, and which sits in such stark contrast to some of these forms of digital learning today.
Well, here I am on Zoom, right, talking about the long traditions that were really apprenticeships. I guess it's a way to think about it. So, spiritual journey, depth journey, would require you to place yourself in proximity of one or more teachers, and more importantly, although the teachers might say they're the most important aspect, more importantly, within the practices that would allow you on a repetitive basis to gain a cellular level understanding of what it means to be human. What does that mean? What are the responsibilities? What is it that you can learn from the universe as it transitions on a daily basis, a yearly basis, as the decades move on? And what is it that you can learn from the stories that people may relate, and then what stories may bubble up in you over time? These are irrespective of the various pathways that you might call different names in the world. Most of them were effectively apprenticeships until, maybe about 100 years ago. And then it became more and more difficult for that way of transmission to occur. And since then, I think we've just been figuring it out. We've been figuring it out.
Yeah, fascinating to hear about that was a form of transmission up until about the last 100 years or so. And it reminds me of an experience I had just last month. And I was with a group and a collective called the National Council of Elders. They're a collective of movement elders who have devoted their lives to advancing justice movements over the last 70 years. And they had invited a group of young organizers and activists to join them in conversation around what is the role of nonviolence in today's social movements. And so we spent 4 days in that inquiry together in person. And we also were at a place that was so meaningful to also sit together in, at the Highlander Center based in Tennessee, which was or is a historic folk school for Southern and Appalachian movements in grassroots organizing. And one of the elders coming into the gathering had said, the purpose of our time is not exactly training, it is about deepening. And I could really feel, as we were sitting in these rocking chairs, feeling the sacredness of this place and of the shared presence with elders and young people, a true, deepening through the storytelling of putting the Nashville sit-ins next to the Gaza student encampments, hearing direct experiences, the heart space that opens when physically sitting in the presence of people across time, And it just made me feel that, or it awakened such a longing in myself to be in more of these relationships and containers of accompaniment. And I also feel that so many young people and people are seeking this form of training and relationship. And so, yeah, I guess I wonder, Norma, about how we in movements and in healing work support this form of relational accompaniment, given that in the last 100 or so years, this kind of form hasn't sustained, or it has changed.
It's changed because life has quickened, and life has, in the technology of shortcuts, we've shortcutted many things, including the ways in which we hold relationships, for example. And so that part about sitting with people in apprenticeship may no longer be possible for most folks. Apprenticeship assumes that you would, for example, you would sit with the elders and for 10 years, right? And you would be with them most of the time. You might have a day job and do those types of things, but you would then return at many times during the week to be with the people that you would be learning deeply from. And that is like it's impractical on many fronts. And I would say it's impractical for the numbers of people that we would need to have on a critical mass to go deep enough for these particular times. So some might be able to do that, but not enough people for the critical mass of people we need who will operate in a different place of their agency rather than just going back and forth between their amygdala and their heart. And so we have this conundrum. But I believe that conversations, long conversations that may have a beginning, but not necessarily an end, ones that might continue from person to person, from peoples to peoples, in groups, not as entertainment or consumption, but in relationship and in massaging and working, in the inquiry, the long inquiry. And then the aspect of embedding embodied practice within that. So as you sat with the elder council, was Kathy Sanchez there?
Yes, and yes. I believe Elder Kathy is on right now too. Hello, Elder Kathy.
Kathy. Kathy and I have not seen each other for a while, and so we are missing each other. That a thing that would happen, though not everyone would notice right away, is that over the days, you would begin to breathe in that long and truncated way that people breathe when they're no longer in their heads and they're just in the experience of who it is that they are. So whether you had a meditation practice or not, you would begin to enter that particular embodied space of breathing with each other. You would notice that. And in that noticing, then you would form a relationship that would be at many levels of your consciousness. And in those many levels of consciousness, you would begin to understand people differently. Not only the words that they said or the concepts that they had to deliver, but at a much deeper cellular, granular, stardust level. And I believe that promoting and cultivating and practicing those kinds of spaces are going to be critical as we enter this next phase of our existence.
Mm. Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I love both it's almost like ecosystem and long arc horizon of these relationships, of some going very deep over the arc of 10 or so years, and also the forms that require mass, uh, a way for relationships to also have breadth as well, and extend across webs, and then the across time as well. I wanted to just ask about on this topic before we move into your book. Just you write so much about mutual thriving, and I'm specifically so curious about intergenerational mutual thriving and interdependence, whether that means, in this transmission across history through story, but also through practical care of how do we care for one another across generations, and make sure that our elders are supported practically, and that our children also are taken care of. And I'm just so curious for you, Norma, how you sense, or what senses get awakened, or images when you think about intergenerational thriving and interdependence.
Well, I think about the ancestors that didn't know about me, but have been good ancestors to me. In other words, that both on the Native Hawaiian side and on the Hakka side, I think about the decisions that they made at consequential times in their paths that would make it possible for my people to even survive, let alone have joy or know things about the best things to eat and the best things to avoid eating. I think about the small aspects of conversation that were passed from generation to generation, where you don't know who the source of it is, but you know that it's important to pass on. Even if you're someone like me, I have no biological children, but there are younger people in my life, and so I have descendants nonetheless. And how important it is to pass those things on, not as scoldings, not as things that they somehow have to memorize, but as just little breaths of possibility that they might remember when they're reaching the point when they will soon become an ancestor. I think about being a good ancestor. And that being a good ancestor means that in these times that are very tight, very critical in how we may or may not turn one way or another, whether or not the consequences of decisions will arise as yeast, or whether or not they will arise as some kind of virus that we do not want. That my choices are consequential. They're not only consequential for me in this moment that I have, or the people who are around me, but they're consequential for descendants who have not yet come. So it's like a reason why I allowed myself to get called off the bench, because at my age, I'm 68 now. At my age, in many things, I am more on the bench than not, which means that I am available, but I shouldn't rush off the bench and try to bulldoze my way into the work of other generations. I should be available. And I allowed myself to be called off the bench for the issues of the contamination of the waters under the fuel tanks at Red Hill, which were built during World War II. Because the consequence of that is existential for descendants. The fuel has not yet made its way to the aquifer, but because it is in the ground, if we do not pay any attention to it, it will someday, perhaps 100 years from now, maybe even longer than that. And for me to say that, well, that's the problem of someone else after I am gone, would mean that I'm not paying responsibility to the longest of arcs, right? The ones that make it possible for people to thrive is for all of the generations to not consider yourself to, just, be born without a previous generation, and that you do not die not taking into consideration what you're doing. And so it's the web of thriving is what I think of, right? Not just my consequential thriving, but the web of thriving that gets passed from people to people, generation to generation, from one country to another.
Thank you. So your book, When No Thing Works, was released a day after the US elections. And you shared, though, that in writing this book, Norma, you did not write for a particular outcome. You wrote for a particular time period. I'd love to hear more about this time period you mean.
Well, this is a time period that I've been observing for some time. And in that observation that I have planned in accordance, with respect to, well, what is it that I would do, and what is it that I would be in relationship with, and things of that sort. Writing an actual book that's going to be published and put out in the world and read by people that I have never met and will never meet, that's like an entirely different kind of thing for me. And, as our previous conversation, right, when I talk about the long line of apprenticeship, long lines of apprenticeship don't include writing a book and sending it out into the world, right? It's a long lines of apprenticeship require just face-to-face conversations and passing those things on. So, but because we are in a time place of collapse, the question is, can you pass things on fast enough only with the people who are directly in front of you? And the answer is no. So you can't go in as much depth in a book, but you do have to cast the seeds into the wind. You have to figure out which way the wind is blowing, and then you have to cast the seeds in that direction so they can disperse and people can take whatever bit of nourishment may be there, and they can add their own water and figure out what that might mean. So it is into this moment that I was writing into, or the moment as I see it arising and moving and changing. So none of that is static. I knew, though, that the outcome of this election would not be definitive. So one side would win and another side would not win, but that would not mean that things would be decided. And so the people who won would not shift their views in accordance with the people who did not win, and people who did not win would not shift their views just because the other side had. And so we're in a time of maximum polarization And you'd say, like in the consequences of a binary, is that when binaries are equally matched, then nothing changes. Okay. But even though nothing changes, it doesn't mean that the environment doesn't change or that conditions don't change. So conditions can be untended to because sides are so equally matched that the fight between them becomes more consequential than the conditions around them. And so this is a dangerous situation that we're entering. And as a result, it requires a different kind of human to meet this moment. There'll be plenty of people to litigate the various issues. I have at lots of forums and movements and schools and leadership trainings and all kinds of things to litigate the differences in the ideologies. But beyond that, I believe that a evolution of humanity needs to occur that surpasses the ideological, that moves even farther and beyond that.
I'd love to invite you on that to read a little passage of one of your poems you share in this book to give people a felt sense of, I think, both that sense of stalemate and also that opportunity that lies ahead. I think it's on page 6, Norma.
Yes. So Serena, we didn't practice this, but you obviously like this poem because you asked me to read it. So I wonder if you would read it with me. Would you read it with me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we'll each read 2 lines. Okay? Right. Okay. Why don't you start?
What to make of falling apartness?
What to do?
To feel, to have.
Too many wants, I'm afraid.
In this falling apartness, a hollowing out.
Of what we believe, we thought, believed.
Hoped so amazingly from all sides.
The right and
the left.
All sides unexpectedly caught beyond guard.
Rails falling in this apartness.
All sides. Ah.
Something stirs in this one possibility.
The rising as in yeast.
Dormant until spit upon.
With a bit of sugar and warm water, something stirs.
When no thing, absolutely
no thing works.
Something stirs. If
and only if we see what cannot be seen.
And hear what cannot be heard. A stance unfolds.
A threshold appears. What?
What? I love that last line. What?
Okay. All right. So I know you're going to, I'll read it again. Okay. Again. What to make of falling apartness, what to do, to feel, to have. Too many wants, I'm afraid, in this falling apartness, a hollowing out of what we thought, believed, hoped. So amazingly from all sides, the right and the left, all sides unexpectedly caught beyond guard, rails falling in this apartness, all sides. Ah, something stirs in this one possibility, the rising as in yeast dormant until spit upon with a bit of sugar and warm water. Something stirs when no thing, absolutely no thing works. Something stirs. If and only if we see what cannot be seen and hear what cannot be heard, a stance unfolds, a threshold appears. What? Serena, what do you like about this poem?
I love what? Like when no thing works, when all the stances have been taken and there's just stalemate over after gridlock. It's at that moment when a threshold appears and in a stance, one stance can emerge. And it's like at that critical juncture moment, at that threshold, there are possibilities that appear. And it's within that moment that I feel so moved by in your writings and in your teachings. And yeah, that's what jumps out at me is the admission of when no thing works, and then what happens when we pick our heads up from that and look into the horizon, what emerges from that.
Yes. Until then, we will believe that other strategies that we have, all we have to do is to put them on steroids, do more of them, and we will prevail.
Mm.
That is the way of the human determination. And so until no thing works, we don't reach that critical juncture where enough people will turn to other things. And it is only at that moment when big change can occur.
Well, I would imagine those of us joined today and listening on a podcast are wondering, so we're at this threshold now, Norma. Now what? And how might we be and how might we embody this moment? And you speak about horizon work. I'd love to get your sense of how we be through that.
Well, we have the stories from the past. We have the stories for the present, which is a good amount of where movement work occurs, which is we're effectively saying to ourselves and to other people and to policymakers what it is that we would like to have happen right now. That's like what I call the stories of the present. And the stories of the future should not be just the realm of science fiction storytellers. They should be like the biggest, most manifest dreams of what we hope the world will become. That is larger than the work that can be possible in the next few years. And it's only in that larger story, and hopefully ones that we're not telling individually, but ones that we're telling collectively, that we will see what the big work is that current decisions can make possible. And I'm a believer in telling the thriving story, which is to say that the apocalypse, which, by the way, we are probably in the beginning stages of in any case, but the falling apartness occurs whether or not we dream into it or do anything about it. We could say that the world collapses because we didn't pay attention to something else. And it just takes its course. The institutions crumble as they have been for some time. Even the ones that we hope to build are having difficulty keeping up. And so all of the structures that have taken hundreds and in some cases thousands of years are having difficulty at this point. So our responsibility becomes to dream into and to tell in a fair amount of detail the horizon story, and to build into that horizon story the aspects of thriving in which we are interdependent, meaning that we see our success as being intermingled with the success of others, our lives as being connected to other people's lives. The human life to not be only about the human life, that it is connected to the earth and to the universe that the earth is a part of. That these would be the ways in which we entangle our future. Yeah. And in that story will be the clear pathways of what we need to do right now. All we have to do is work backwards from there to the current generation. What is the current generation's job? And by generation, here I'm meaning all the people who live on this earth at this time, irrespective of our age. So not necessarily, the generation of people who are in their, 30s or 40s or 50s, but all the people who are living at this time.
I love that way of being with generations and in generational time. And I also love, Norma, that you speak about this story or this storytelling work, visioning into our future of thriving, that it must be concrete, and it also must be local, and it must be so particular and specific to where it is we are, and that we have such a familiarity with the story of collapse, much less so the practice of looking and seeing so clearly what this story of thriving is. I would love to hear a story maybe that you have to invite us into what that kind of storytelling could look like. And I have a part 2 of that question, but I'll hold off on that.
Okay. Well, it takes a bit of time, right, to tell a story. So I'm not sure whether we would have enough time to tell Rise's story, which is to say, when you sit down and tell one, you shouldn't necessarily be bound by the amount of time. But what I could tell you is like a story that sits within me, and therefore what it is that I would say as I sit across the table from the Navy, talking about what we're going to do about these fuel tanks, right, and the fuel that's in the ground. And so what I would say to the Navy is I'd say 100, 120, 140, 150 years from now, I would want the people who are living here, the people who are native to this place, or the people who choose to live in this place, to still be able to draw water from the aquifer as we always have, where this water source so abundant that it only takes 25 years for water to make the full cycle, from the water that is falling to the water that is drawn, naturally filtered through this ground and abundant enough that it could feed and nourish a place that would grow many things, including food that we would mostly grow for ourselves rather than import here. Again, we would be able to do that. That only our desire would have to be remade, but our water would not have to be remade. That water would still be available to us, fresh and clean, not having to be filtered in a way that it would pass the muster of a regulator, but the grandmothers who cook the rice at night would still smell a faint scent of jet fuel, even if they're told that this water is safe to drink. What grandmother would want to feed their baby, their kiki, rice that had a faint smell of jet fuel. We would not do that. And so we would have to find other means. But not enough water could be brought into this place. The weight alone would not allow enough shipments of water to come into this place to continuously allow over 1 million people to live here. And so that future, I do not move my people towards. The future where we would have to shrink the population of this place just because there wouldn't be enough water. The future that I see is we moved for nearly 4 decades pursuing the science that would make it possible through microbial degradation for the fuels to be neutralized in the soil and then cycled out of the soil through various means that we do not yet have discovered. We have a sense of what microbial degradation would do, and we pursued that science as much as we pursued any science to make that possible. So that generations now, whole legions of people would make it their kuleana, their responsibility, their work, their life's work as engineers and microbiologists and hydrologists and environmental engineers, and they would make it their life's work to make this happen. That's the future story that we need to make possible today at this table. You, the US Navy, and we, the people of this generation. Something like that.
When you invite people into that kind of imagination and space, well, even in this particular example, what becomes possible, or what are the reactions and responses that you meet?
Well, you'll have to stay tuned. But I have done this at other tables before on other issues. And you're inviting people to move beyond the limitations of whatever they think is possible, right? That's what you're doing. And you're also giving them the means to do that. So I'm telling a story, but I'm moving back and forward in time space. I'm giving people the strategy pathways of how to get from here to there. But first we set our purpose. Our purpose is for as many people who are drawing upon the water today, that they're still able to draw upon that water. That it does not have to be filtered in a way that would meet some regulator's standard for it to be safe. That you cannot smell anything in it. That a grandmother feeding their mo'opuna, the rice, which in many cultures, right, if there's anything sacred, it would be the rice. That in that rice, there'd be no taint of it. And because there's no taint of it, you knew that it would nourish people in that particular way. I would have had my homework in that story. I would be able to give the alternative story, which I always think of as the story is the fruitful story. The alternative story is what happens if you're not fruitful, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And the alternative story is that because of what it would take to transport water to Hawaii, that you would not be able to transport enough water for the population, for even a percentage of the population we have today. And it would shift the economy in its entirety if what every household needed to do was to spend a good portion of their income making sure that everything that they drank, everything that they used to cook with would have to be bottled water. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I provided a structure for decision making for today. Obviously, choices are still going to need to be made.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that you can lay out a compelling future if you're only going to say that what it is that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to actually provide a very clear and compelling case for what you want with enough detail to know what kind of work you need to do.
Mm-hmm. It just feels like such a paradigm shift from like where we begin to root ourselves. And in the context of this conversation, it's like, feels like it's a way of interrupting collapse by actually beginning with the horizon and moving towards that. Norma, you've used the word interrupting a lot, interrupting habits, interrupting narratives. And I just love that invitation. It feels very of the nature of the poem you shared of just, and what, like at that juncture, what? And I'd love to talk about some of the practices for how we embody the horizon. And one of the habits I think that often comes up is around fear. What do you say to people about how we work with and disrupt these patterns of fear, both individually as well as collectively?
Well, fear is contagious, first of all. So, therefore, for people who are concerned about fear being contagious, then you are the people that need to take measures to reverse the course of the contagion. Fear is happens as a contagion, but it also brews in isolation. And so therefore, the being with people, belonging with people, being in mutual care of other people gives us a pathway to move that fear and not have it get stuck. That doesn't mean that the fear will like evaporate, but what you don't want to do is to get stuck and collect in dark places. People have a mistaken notion of courage. Courage is that which occurs in the face of fear. It doesn't mean that it's in the absence of fear. In fact, if you take bold action and there is nothing that you are afraid of, then you will not pay attention to the mitigation of risk. So we'd say those are foolhardy people, the people who have absolutely nothing, no fear at all. And the fear is also there are lots of physical manifestations with fear. And so in embodied practice, there's a cultivation of the ways to allow fear to move to its, you'd say it's the place that it is, and don't allow it to bloom into something else. So you're not trying to extinguish it. What you're doing is you're just trying to not have it rise higher and higher up in your body, literally, is a thing that happens with fear. And so we go to our breath practice. Low in your body, slow, especially in the exhalation. And to just allow for the groundedness of who it is that you are, which is a state of being, it's not a state of mind. So when you say, when you tell people, well, let's just stop and take a breath, that shouldn't be a metaphorical thing, right? People should actually take a breath, but they may not have a breath practice. And so that having an actual breath practice that is normalized in spaces, I believe is critical. It's critical. So when I go into a space and for the first time, a thing that I'm gauging is it going to be okay with people to do some breathing, or will they think it's weird? Now, the notion that we even have that thought means that most of our spaces, breathing is not normalized. Right? That if you say, okay, can we take 3 breaths together, that people will feel uncomfortable. Okay? And to me, that's all an indication of the separation of us from us. In other words, we've left our embodied selves, and we are separating our body and our mind and how we feel and what our spirit is like. And we compartmentalize those things. And it doesn't matter the subject matter. So I've got into spaces where they want to have a spirit conversation with me. And then I say, well, can we begin with 3 breaths? And they all say, do we have to do that? So it doesn't matter what the subject matter is. It's that separation, that human separation is something that we need to come back together. My teacher believed that you need to do everything to bring people back into the breath, even if you have to trick them into it. Right? He thought it was so essential. And so he says, can you get them to laugh? Because if they laugh, they'd have to actually take their body would have to breathe in order to laugh. If they laugh, their posture will open up. Their head would rise, just as a natural thing. Yeah. Whatever way may be necessary to get us back into our breath. Breath and it would say like cultivating energy that would be more yang rather than yin. Okay. Interrupts fear. Because when you're doing that, among other things, you move out of your individual self and you move more into the connection, right, with other beings, with the earth, with the energy in the universe. You're not separating yourself from that. And so it very sharply and strongly interrupts the hold that the fear has on you. So the thing about it is, fear is a natural response. But the question is, am I Norma having fears, or am I fear personified? Right? No Norma there.
Yeah. Thanks, Norma. And I'd love to just invite us, as you pointed, to our breath, back to our breath as well. And maybe we'll each take a moment just to have and enjoy three breaths, and also enjoy some water for folks that are getting thirsty as well. Thank you. So we're going to soon move into our collective question and answer portion. And maybe the question that I will leave off on as we then invite in community questions is on the maybe the movement of from the yin to the yang with fear, but also with choice and decision making. Norma, you have a chapter in the book devoted to choosing, and choosing seems essential when we're at these critical junctures or at a moment of just acceleration. And something that you wrote is less pondering, take a breath and simply decide. I would love to get your advice or seeing or inviting into just that movement from the overthinking into the being of choice.
So it may seem like a paradox, right? So, since I talked about the importance of people sitting and telling stories with each other and relationships, talking story, and those types of things. But to me, there's a difference between that and processing. And I believe that we've learned, and this is something we've learned. So I don't think, for example, that that as you grow up as children, that we do much processing. Right? So you absorb and you take what you want and you form it and you move on. And there's just a lot of movement that occurs in the earlier parts of your life. And then I think that in many ways, movement spaces have put an emphasis on process as a way of democratizing collective action. And many of the processes are rules based, and that even in trying to make the processes flat and non-hierarchical, they have a hierarchy of process, and that and what that does is, so if you are, there are people in here who are bakers, so you know that if you over knead the dough, that it beyond the time when it should be kneaded, that your product will turn out in a way in which you will notice that that's the case. And so even a soup or a stew that is overstirred, say, becomes muddy. The distinction of the various elements in that soup will become less clear. And so there's this, it's cultivation is good, as in you cultivate the ground for things to grow. But this over processing, and a way that I know that groups are over processing is if they return to the same arguments over and over again with no decision making occurring. And each time they make the turn again into that same argument, the sides become hardened. And so now instead of 5 reasons to not proceed, you have 10. And yeah, and like that. Okay. And you, in the meantime, the world proceeds. So that which you were arguing about has already changed and shifted. That opening that you had hoped to take advantage of has moved on. The threat that you're hoping to defend against has become a different threat than the one that you were facing. So there's this, in a world that is moving much faster, the conditions of your agency shift much faster. And so therefore, if you're going to have agency, you have to be able to more quickly come to these decision points and make them and move on. That requires you to be in relationship, but not to, be in these processes that, especially the processes in which you are worrying the smaller aspects of actions.
Mm.
Okay. And we can get tied up in that and actually gain power from it, perversely,
Mm.
for being the people that made it possible for that point to be worried about. And we're simply in times where like a different kind of muscle is required of us. We don't have the luxury of these long ponderings. If we are to ponder long things, let it be about things that are 150 years hence. Let's ponder those.
Thanks, Norma. Thank you so much, Norma, and just to everybody here today for joining us on this conversation. Norma, your wisdom, your wit, your clarity, your reverence, it's such an honor to just get to spend time with you today. And for all those listening near and far, just such an encouragement to spend time with this book. You can read it in one sitting. You can take it a chapter at a time. It is such an experience to be with and just to let soak into one's being. So Kira and I have dropped it into the chat along with the Collective Acceleration Learning Community, which has been so meaningful to me. And just such a deep bow of gratitude to you, dear Norma. And thank you on behalf of the New School here at Commonweal. And we hope that you and all those participating today will join us again soon.
Thank you so much. Much aloha to everyone. Be well.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.